If you look at autonomous systems, they're disrupting the economics of warfare, and they're giving people who didn't have a shot 5 years ago a legit shot to winning conflicts. For a couple of $1 million, a second-tier country or a non-state actor can now have some of the same capabilities, and in many cases, force the other side to consume hundreds of millions of dollars to counter that.
You have people in the DoD who say Ukraine is not representative of the future of warfare.
I'd be curious to see who said those comments and if they've ever left DC. Protecting a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a school, or how do you manage counter-defensive strategies there? Hamlet Yousef, managing partner at Irongate Capital Advisors. You're watching the Drone Wars podcast.
Hamlet, thanks for joining us today on the Drone Wars podcast.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Hamlet, we've known each other for like a decade, and I feel like you and I are always texting about like how asymmetrical warfare is going to change the world. And I feel like nothing is, shown that kind of more than the last 3 years in Ukraine. We had glimpses of it before. So I want to make that one of the big themes for today. But before we kind of get into the meat and potatoes of autonomous systems on the battlefield, will you tell everyone a little bit about, who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yep. Thanks for the opportunity, Dan. Looking forward to the conversation. My name is Hamlet Yousef, one of the managing partners of Irongate Capital Advisors. We're a early stage defense-focused VC fund. We invest in companies that have an application in national security and defense, but in many cases also have a greater impact in the civilian economy. We leverage our network of investors and folks in our fund that have deep ties to the intelligence community and the defense departments to understand where and what to invest in. And when we invest, and as an LP, either in a fund or in a company, we help those folks get into the ecosystem and also cross-pollinate with other companies and investors in this ecosystem. Prior to that, I had a career in the national security defense space. So a very intimate understanding of how this space works from the inside out. That's the benefit of us, as many of us have active security clearances and relationships inside government, which allows us to understand where and what to invest in. And this area that we're about to talk about, autonomous warfare, we have been very actively focused on for years. And it seems like the last couple of years, folks like you, us, and others that were early are now being, significantly vindicated and validated for seeing this thing coming. And I do think we're in the opening stages of a much bigger boom in the arena of defense tech, defense innovation, and autonomous systems and command and control. And defensive systems are just a massive opportunity for growth and investment. But also they're going to change every facet of how we operate and live our lives. So I think it's a critical conversation worth having.
So when you and I met, I was doing counter UAS stuff, and I think we saw a preview of like what the art of the possible was with off-the-shelf DJI drones that ISIS was using in Iraq and Syria, right?
Yep.
Like how have we come from, those early days a decade ago to today, and like what are some of the bigger changes that you're seeing in the space?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think it's the democratization of autonomy is critical. And I think the big driver that has been the collapsing cost of autonomous systems. Group 1, Group 2, even Group 3 drones were pricey 10, 15 years ago. And kind of where price points are right now, they're becoming cheaper and cheaper. So as a result, you're starting to see people being able to buy off-the-shelf platforms or inexpensive platforms and use them on the operational battlefield, in many cases offensively or defensively, and make a significant impact in terms of kind of the balance of power. To me, this is a modern day David versus Goliath battle. If you look at autonomous systems, they're disrupting the economics of warfare, and they're giving people who didn't have a shot 5 years ago a legit shot to winning conflicts. To win a battle, you need to be able to control the air, and you need to be able to control the seas. If you control those two things, you have a significant demonstrable advantage over your adversary. Well, to field a Navy or an Air Force costs billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of hardware. That was 20th century. 21st century, for a couple of $1 million, a second-tier country or a non-state actor can now have some of the same capabilities of being able to control the skies and the seas, and in many cases, force the other side to consume hundreds of millions of dollars to counter that. And that's just, those economics are not sustainable. And I think the Ukraine war, I think the Israel-Gaza conflict, the Israel-Hezbollah conflict, the Houthi conflicts and some of the things we saw happen inside Iran in the last month are clear examples of how this dynamic is changing the battlefield.
So, like you just talked about offense versus defense, right? And the ability for someone small and technical, or a group that is small and technical, and again, that could be a state or a non-state actor, or even an individual, to really punch above their weight. How do you think we should? And this is an opinion question. How do you think we should be weighing offense versus defense in this space? Should we be, going heavy in defense? Should we be building a massive hedge? Like, what's your thoughts? And how would you what would you tell the government to do today?
Yeah, I think you need to invest in both, and you need to be a leader in both, because what you're seeing right now is an explosion of a technology-driven arms race, driven by private sector innovation around offensive capabilities for drones and autonomous systems, and on par for that, a defensive capability on how to counter it. So, and you're seeing the iteration happen in Ukraine on both sides, where autonomous systems, in whether it's electronic warfare, jamming, or kinetic solutions to address drones, there's constant evolution of technology on how to address it. So I don't think you invest in one or the other. I think you got to do both. That's one part of it. The other part of it is you got to start understanding where does regulation and ethics play into this as well, because as you start moving into a more autonomous battlefield, especially when you start talking about swarms, how do you craft the right defensive strategy and technological solutions that allow you to protect an asset, but also doesn't act as a detriment? That becomes a bigger, I think, question when it comes into defensive solutions in a civilian space, protecting a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a school or a music festival or a stadium. That's how do you manage counter defensive strategies there? A lot easier on a battlefield, because if it's not a friendly, you fry it or you shoot it. You can't do that when you're trying to protect a civilian target. So that's something I think people haven't really thought through yet. And I think, and I hate to say it, it might take a Sputnik moment or a oh crap moment when something happens domestically through a non-state actor or a proxy that makes us realize how much of a vulnerability we have there against autonomous.
Yeah. How do you think the new administration is doing when it comes to thinking through that part of the problem?
Too early to tell. I always want to judge politicians by their actions, not their comments. So I'd say the comments are spot on so far. So let's see how the action, the follow through, comes through. I think everyone is tracking Secretary Hegseth and the announcement he made on basically the lawns of the Capitol about wanting to break down bureaucracy and engaging the private sector in investing in autonomous systems. So I think that's a great first step. As somebody who came from governments, particularly the national security defense community, bureaucracy and layered processes can always get in the way of adoption and innovation. So I think the first thing we need to do is address that and streamline that as much as possible, because I think there's real money and innovation on the sidelines that wants to get in and help. But capital doesn't like inefficiencies. Capital does not like bureaucracy and waste. So whenever we can streamline that, I think that's helpful. And I think we need to revisit and understand how policy affects counter drone solutions, because my understanding is right now, if you're sitting in your backyard and there's a drone that's being flown over your backyard and you do anything to it, you're basically committing the same offense as if you're firing on an aircraft at an airport. So there's some regulations that I think we need to work around to understand what a counter drone initiative would look like for the civilian economy, because that is going to be a real threat in the long term. Actually, probably not in the long term, in the midterm.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. We have kind of sovereignty over our property in a lot of different ways, except for drones.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can go to jail for shooting down a drone because it's technically an aircraft, right?
Yeah.
So we definitely need to, I don't know, bifurcate what is an actual aircraft versus what is a 15-pound drone, and how we think about that.
Yeah.
Drone Wars is recorded from Firestorm's global headquarters in San Diego, California. Each week on the podcast, we bring you cutting-edge insights from unmanned industry leaders. Listen as they share the breakthroughs and technologies they're working on, the hard lessons they've learned, and the bold predictions about what the next 5 to 10 years in unmanned systems and advanced manufacturing have in store for us. Enjoying the show so far? Then be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now back to the show. Okay, I want to ask you a question because you said that actions speak louder than words, right? One of the things we hear, and we're definitely getting mixed messages, I'll be honest, as an industry partner here, that you have people in the DoD who say Ukraine is not representative of the future of warfare. It's flat, there's no ocean. And yet, like, we're seeing AI powered Shaheeds, we're seeing terminal guidance being built on $15 Raspberry Pi chips. We're seeing the beginnings of all of these kind of like smart attritable weapons. How do you balance that, or what's your take on that comment?
I'd be curious to see who said those comments and if they've ever left DC. Let's begin there, without naming names or individuals. I think 100% Ukraine is going to be the future of warfare, and it's not going to be the future; it's a future. So for those who don't believe, to your point, it's flat and whatever, okay, then look at the Houthis. I mean, you have a ragtag bunch of whatever you want to call them, hanging off the coast of Yemen, and they're using $200,000, $300,000, $50,000 modified drones, supplied with components through Iran and China, to basically shut down a good chunk of global shipping, which impacts billions and billions of dollars of global trade. And then our solution to that is to launch, I don't know, a couple $1 billion worth of naval and air assets to address a couple $1 million worth of flying lawnmowers or mopeds, whatever you want to call it. Those economics are not sustainable. And we need to address that. And to say that the future of warfare and autonomy is not representative of Ukraine, I think is being very myopic. I think, again, Ukraine, Gaza, Hezbollah, the Red Sea, obviously the rumblings in the South China Sea, what Israel did in Iran in June. I mean, those are all examples of how the future of warfare is changing. It's changing demonstrably. And I think we've got to stop being wedded to 20th century programs and platforms that benefit a certain congressman's constituencies, and understand that we need to change. We have to change before we have to from a conflict standpoint, because if not, then we're going to get caught flat-footed. And that being caught flat-footed could mean losing a battle. It could mean being caught flat-footed if something happens domestically from an asymmetric standpoint. I mean, one of the things we're not talking about is right now, the issue of drones and autonomous systems is an issue out of far. It's an issue in Ukraine. It's an issue in Israel. It's an issue in Iran and the South China Sea and potentially China and the Red Sea. But drones are cheap, man. At what point do the cartels begin to embrace them more and more in terms of how they're using them operationally? And God forbid, what happens if that thinking falls into the hands of a non-state actor, a criminal organization, or a terrorist group? I mean, the Pandora's box is open at this point. So you can't wait for something to happen to react. You've got to understand where the threats are and the opportunities are. Make sure you stay ahead of them. That's what I'm saying. Go back to your original question. How do you address this from a governmental standpoint? Government needs to fight in unison, hand in hand with the private sector, both on the offensive and defensive side. What government can't do is government cannot be in the business of picking and dictating winners and losers. I think what government needs to do is be in the business of properly dictating requirements, pain points, and opportunities, and then work hand in hand with government to make sure the right solutions are being brought forth and invested in.
Do you have conversations with folks in the government who come to you and say, how can we better leverage the private sector and private capital?
Yeah, and yes, we do as a fund. I mean, that's been kind of our focal point for several years. And this is something that I think is going to continue to gain bipartisan momentum. If you go back and understand where the origins of defense tech were, I mean, this is something that President Obama really began to push under his administration, but even going prior to that, during the Bush administrations and the later stages of the Clinton administration is when InQtel was formed, and this idea of defense investing and bringing private sector tech into government began. When Trump won in his first presidency, this is an area that began to gain some significant traction and support. President Biden takes over in 2020, and you see a continuation of that. President Trump is now obviously in office, and you're seeing a continuation and amplification of that as well. That's a good thing at the macro level. Having worked in the bureaucracy, we're not there yet. So yeah, and I think they're saying the right things. This is where I think the actions of government are necessary, which is hopefully you see this continued effort to engage private sector innovation, private sector solutions, private sector capital. I don't want to say you're outsourcing a lot of this to the private sector, but in many instances you are. And this also applies to the primes. Primes are no longer gatekeepers for innovation. And I think the primes that understand what is the most aggressive way to embrace innovation, to work with founders and startups and entrepreneurs and either acquire, partner, or bring them into the fold. Those are the ones who are going to win. If not, then I think that opens a door for the likes of like an Anduril to become a next generation prime.
So when you think of that broader ecosystem that's going to be required to be built, right, deliver this type of technology, not even thinking about drone manufacturing, okay, or autonomous system manufacturing. There's a lot of other pieces of this, right?
Yep.
Like testing. That's a huge issue we have, right? Where can you go get ranges to fly your drones? That's not in the middle of the desert. Where can we get ocean space or lake space to test these things? Like, how much does that ecosystem need to expand besides the, hey, we're building something really cool and then handing it to an end user, in your opinion?
Well, it's going to take a whole of government, whole of society approach. The federal government cannot and probably should not go out there and mandate exactly where we should test, but you create the incentives for the states that want to take this on to do that. So whether it's Nevada, California, Texas, New York, if they have the inherent capabilities to dedicate part of their lands and part of their resources to help drive innovation, testing, and design, that's going to be, I think, a critical force multiplier to make sure that the right ideas can get out there and kind of test themselves out. And again, free markets, let the best innovation, let the best company, let the best solutions win. Government needs to sit on top of that and see what kind of innovation is happening, and then obviously look to acquire and work with the ones that directly address those acute pain points.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So, like, there's a lot of aerospace and defense, obviously, in Southern California.
Yep.
A lot of us end up going and testing in like desert lands or on BLM lands where this happens. There's a lot of military bases that are close to Southern California where this big cluster is. They're not being turned on. It's something that we talk a lot about in the aero side, but it's the same thing on the water side as well, right? Like, we need almost maybe some private ranges that have COAs where you can go test this type of stuff, because the reality is building something in a vacuum doesn't work, right? So if the government is going to rely on the small companies to solve this problem, but they're not going to give them the facilities, we're going to need to backfill that as part of the broader ecosystem. And I'm hopeful that this administration in particular, if you raise enough alarms, they'll definitely support things like this.
Yeah.
But like, it leads to the next kind of set of questions I want to ask you, which is around kind of, how do you think as an investor now? Like, geopolitics, obviously, you and I talk about this stuff all the time.
Right.
But like, how do you like create a lens that then, is it data driven? Is it your gut? Like, what is it that lets you think of like the big themes you need to invest in?
Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, I think investing in this space requires the ability to regularly have access to proprietary deal flow. Proprietary intelligence is a big part of that. So understanding where the thought leadership is, understanding where the innovation is happening, understanding where the temperature is of the customer, whether it's the primes or government, or more importantly, the end user, I think is critical. So listening to just the senior staff at the Pentagon or the agencies, I mean, you need to have those conversations and relationships. But in the intelligence world, access to raw intel is critical. So access to operators who are coming back from mission, access to people who are sitting on desks at the edge and dealing with issues, understanding where their pain points are, and seeing if that marries what the senior command and staff is telling you, I think is critical. So having that edge, I think is important. There's a ton of money moving into this space. There's a ton of interest moving into this space, which is great. We welcome it. Selfishly speaking, as a hybrid VC fund that invests in funds and managers, the more funds that come into the space is great for us, because it validates our thesis and gives us an opportunity to make sure we're investing with the best funds and the best companies. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, what we got to be worried about is lack of a better word, venture tourists. People who are coming here because this is the hot space, but aren't going to be here for the next 2 or 3 years and are going to move on once the space kind of is no longer in vogue. You can't do that when it comes to defense tech, because so much of what defense tech involves requires hardware. It's more expensive. So you can't have the move fast, break stuff mentality of traditional SaaS and Silicon Valley VC. You need to be more measured and more thoughtful in terms of where and what you invest in. And you can't chase a company just to see how it does. You've got to really make sure that the secret sauce of the mousetrap they're developing is impacting and has a real relevance not only to what the Pentagon is saying or the agency is saying or the Bureau is saying, but really ties into the same feedback and intelligence you're getting at the operator level to say, no, this is a real thing. This is a real solution. That's a big part of it. But the other part of it is I think you raised a great point earlier. This isn't just about investing in the right technologies. There is a rising ecosystem around venture that I think is going to address that. But if we're going to take defense tech seriously, then I think we need to mobilize a greater pool of capital from the private sector to move in here. Real estate, I think, is a point you made. We have a decent number of LPs in our fund that are real estate families. Why would they care about defense tech? Well, easy. It's a diversification, because if 90% of your assets are real estate, then you might want to diversify into tech. But if a Firestorm lab needs to develop a private range to test its goods, maybe here's an opportunity where a real estate family can come in and, to your point, look to acquire and develop a plot of land that is being underutilized and use it for exactly this purpose, which is range identification and, giving a platform for testing drones. If you need to build out a manufacturing facility, okay, a different pool of capital is needed for that. It's not venture. This is an opportunity. Like I said, I think the future of warfare is changing. The future of everything is changing through some of these disruptions that are happening from a technological standpoint. There's a ton of capital, ton of cash on the sidelines right now that could be poured into this space. Not all of it needs to invest in the next great tech. There's an entire support system that needs to come with that. Everything from manufacturing less critical dumb tech domestically to owning supply chain and being vertically integrated. Those are opportunities that I think that are there's no end to those opportunities. I think it's being able to understand where and how to start pulling together that syndicate of capital and innovation and making sure it's addressing some of the key needs for government. The market is paying attention. It's interested. How do you do that? So those are high-paying, high-end domestic manufacturing jobs, and I think the states that embrace that are going to be the states that are going to be set up to succeed significantly in the next several decades. The states that want to continue to tax it are going to have some issues. So I think we need to start educating the VC community and the startup community that not all capital is the same.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. Each week, we bring you fascinating conversations with leaders shaping the future of air, sea, land, and space technologies. Catch new episodes wherever podcasts can be found. Until then, we'll see you next time.